Hello, Mr. President. My name is Amanda VINICKY, and I'm with Illinois Public Radio. And I would like to ask you what your plan is to do with slaves, which you have recently freed in your Emancipation Proclamation. What's the plan for them? Now, if the country ever is to come together, where do they go? They don't have educations. Many of them may not have job skills or be welcomed on the plantations where they previously worked without any pay. How do you handle that situation?
You say you're a girl from Illinois?
I am.
Then you are familiar with Senator Lyman Trumbull, my good friend from the Senate in Illinois. Lyman and I have been talking about a 13th and 14th Amendment that would free all slaves for all time. And while we're talking about that, let me go on the public record, if I might, to talk about that emancipation, which folks have been criticizing me since that came out on January 1st of '63. They're saying, Lincoln, it didn't free nobody. And I've read it, I wrote it, Seward signed it, and I will give you this as a political document to discuss the freedom of all slaves. It served its purpose, but it served a greater purpose. Because you see, the Confederates was sending emissaries, if you will, through the blockade to Europe, saying, when will France come in the war and save us? And the Confederates sent their emissaries to England and said, when will you come in the war and save us? For them to come in the war after we issued an emancipation would make them look like hypocrites, because they had already outlawed slavery in Europe a time before. So to put them in their place, the emancipation served its purpose, and our good friend Lyman Trumbull put the stamp of approval right on the top of it with the 13th and 14th Amendment. So I thank you for your kind question. And when you're questioning Trumbull when all this is done, you tell him Lincoln sent his greetings.
Mr. President, Elizabeth Wooley, ABC News Channel 20, also in Springfield, Illinois. I want to go back to what you mentioned about the 13th Amendment and our concerns about whether or not slavery is really over. As it stands right now, blacks in the armed forces are still segregated, and they are also paid half as much as their white counterparts. Do you plan to rectify that, and how?
Well, we've had plenty of discussion about rectifying the issue of pay for colored troops, and they indeed did their job. It was 180,000 of them turned the tide, and I was thinking about my good friend Frederick Douglass, when back in '61 he said, why would you fight with your white hand and tie your black one behind your back? Untie the black hand. And we surely did with the colored troops. Now they have paid the supreme sacrifice as the white troops. Their pay will become equal, and they will be ready to be in our society as full-fledged Americans under the Constitution. It may seem unpalatable with some of our dissatisfied Southern brethren, but again, my administration will hold true to a peaceable reconciliation, and anything less than that will have to be dealt with. And I'm asking the support of both houses of the Congress to come on board. And Stevens, well, he's got his own agenda, but we'll keep him at bay. And Trumbull's got his own agenda, and we'll let him work it a while.
Mr. President, you spoke a moment ago about preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, yet you moved to suspend habeas corpus in some cases. You brought civilians before military tribunals to be tried. Do you still support those moves, and can you resolve those moves with the Constitution?
The Constitution remains intact. The surrender has been signed. Now, as to that habeas corpus argument, we was at war, and I've had a discussion with my good friend David Davis of Bloomington, Illinois. And when you get back and talking to Trumbull, you might tell Davis I said greetings as well. And Davis says there's more to it, but he's not ready to put anything to writing yet. So that whole issue of habeas corpus, but I struggled with the notion we had brave men willing to pick up arms for this Constitution. And how could I hang them when they ran away when I couldn't do nothing with the person that made them run away in the first place? And the pigeonholes in my office at the Executive Mansion are full of cases of pardons for cases just like that. Sir, we were at war. I used my powers as Chief Executive and Commander-in-Chief to be sure that the war would be carried out appropriately. It took me a while to find a general that fought, but I did find one. And young lady, when you get back to Illinois, if General Grant's there, you might tell him I sent my greetings. No, yes, sir.
Jeff Hoffman with WFMB Radio in Springfield, Illinois. Talk a little bit about General Grant. What were his good qualities? What did you like about him, and why did you pick him to be your general?
Thank you, sir. Are you a friend of General Grant's? Very good. Well, he's still my friend. I'm thinking it might be nice now that the war is over for he and the missus to join Mary and I for a trip to the theater. And I'm thinking that might be in order. As to the general, the thing about General Grant, he didn't have a case of the slows. He wanted to fight. And if you recollect all the dispatches and letters and communications with General McClellan, they'd fill a library. And they probably will someday. But dispatches like Abraham Lincoln, Commander-in-Chief, we have captured 6 cows. What should we do with them? Signed, General McClellan, Army of the Potomac. Now tell me, what is going on? I'm to my last wit's end. All I could write is General McClellan, Army of the Potomac. As to the 6 cows, milk them. Signed, Abraham Lincoln. What's a fella to do? But Grant had a way of disappearing. He'd sneak down in a hole one place, and he'd come up somewhere else, and he'd snatch a victory. Then he'd disappear for a while, and he'd come up somewhere else, and he'd snatch a victory. Now, folks would say he'd take to drink now and again, and I made an inquiry because if I found out what brand he drank, I'd send a barrel to each of my generals. General Grant fought. Now, I will not get into the controversy of how Grant was so low on the list of officers to come into the Union, and the fact that he was on Congressman Washburn's list from Galena, Illinois, and I moved him up to number 2. I'm not going to entertain anything about that controversy. The matter's settled.